Welcome to part 13 of half bath to full bath conversion. We're going to start off in the shower stall, take off the protective film and wipe down the corners. You can wipe this down with alcohol and that'll get all the oil or grease or dust. And then we'll use a pure silicone that's designed for kitchen and bath because it's mold and mildew resistant. So I like to run a small bead along the corner from the top down, and then I'll pick up from the bottom and run a bead until it meets my other bead. And once that's done, I will take my finger and push the caulking into the crack and smooth it out at the same time. Once I get too much caulking on my finger, I'll wipe it off with the towel that I have handy. And I'll go around all the areas and do the same thing. Go over it a couple times if there's more caulking than I needed and get it real smooth. I can repeat on the other seam. Start from the top, then start from the bottom, meet in the middle, and wipe my caulking down. And this is how it's going to look once it dries. So I want it to look real smooth and be pressed into place so that it gets a good seal. And I also have to go around the base, where the base of the shower meets the wall of the shower, and get around the outside here. And same process, use my finger and push it into the corner. So now that I have all the caulking done, I'm going to prime the new drywall area. And I like to do my cutting in first, so I will take a 2-inch brush and go along the edges, the corners, any of the trim that I want to prime. And you can see I've got all the edges cut in with my primer, all the corners, all the way throughout the whole project where I want to put primer. Like to put primer over new drywall. That way it doesn't use so much paint when you go to paint. Next, I'm going to roll on the primer, and this will help start to match the ceiling texture with the texture of the old ceiling. Once I get some ceiling paint on there, it'll blend very nicely. So I just go back and forth with my primer. This is a PVA primer. Basically, it sits on top of the drywall and allows the paint to go over top of that. I'm going to start working on my countertop. Now that I've got all my priming done, got it cut down, I've got a build-up kit here. This comes with an end cap kit, usually. I had to make my own, so I've got a couple of strips of particle board, and they're the correct thickness to match my countertop, and I'm just going to glue and then nail these pieces on here. And I've got to put one on the back as well for my backsplash, and I'll nail that on after I glue it. And I've got a piece of laminate that I'm going to use to make my end cap. It's as close as I could find in color to the countertop, so I'm going to set my piece of laminate on the countertop and trace along the countertop, and I'm going to make it a little oversized. You can see my layout here. So I'll use my snips and cut out the pattern that I drew on my laminate sheet. I'm going to go a little bit big, and once I get it cut all the way out, I'm going to use a Wilson Art 600 laminate glue. It's like a real sticky, pressure sensitive rubber cement, if you will. And I'll put that on the whole raw end of the wood, and then I'll start putting it on the end cap. Now when I cut this countertop, I don't have a video of that, but I cut it from the back with a carbide tooth blade and went real slow. Use a carbide tip blade with as many teeth as you can get, and that'll give you a nice clean cut. So I've got my end cap covered with glue and the laminate sheet, so all I have to do is press that on, make sure it's pressed on nice and tight, and we'll let that sit and dry, and I'll start working on the vanity. So I've got my faucet. I'm going to mount that right here. It's a 4-inch spread faucet. Put my faucet nuts on, make sure it's nice and straight, and tighten it all the way down. And then I'll use some silicone for the drain. The directions recommended using silicone, so I'm going to use a clear kitchen and bath silicone, and I'll set that in the drain hole, and I can put my stopper towards the back of the sink because that's where my pop-up's going to work, and I'll screw that in. And once I get that tightened up against the drain, then I have to tighten the nut on the bottom here, and that has to be lined up, and I'll hold that in place and use my channel locks pliers, tighten it up, put my pop-up into place with a little extension piece. I'll lock that in right about there. That looks good. So then I'll tighten that in, and I can adjust the length with the number of holes at the bottom that I use. So you take the little spring clip off and the little nut on here, and I'll slide this in. It should go into the stopper. So you feed the stopper in, and you should be able to link that together, and it'll stay in place and work. So I'm going to set this extension piece on here. Let me tighten this up first. I'll set it on right about here, and we'll see how it works. I'll have to hold this in place because it's going to slide up. Slide it up and down. It looks like a good place. So now I'll put my retainer spring clip on, and that's where I want to be. The third hole down works very well, so we'll go with that. Now I'm going to put my supply lines on. It's a whole lot easier to put those on now than when it's in the vanity. That way I don't have to lay on the vanity and reach up there with my wrench trying to get my supply line nuts tightened up. So I usually do this prior to putting on the vanity top. Got my vanity in place. I'm going to check the wall, make sure I know where my studs are, mark those on the wall, and then I can put a screw in to hold my vanity to the wall, get it started, and I want to put a shim in there, and I can screw in tight and put a shim in the other side, and then I can tighten that one in. And there's another stud back here, so I'll add another shim and throw another screw in, and then I'll do one on the side, and I know where that stud is because the outlet's right above it. So I'll tighten that one in, and my vanity should be locked into place. So I'll just go through and cut off the top of my shims with a utility knife. And some of these are pretty thick at some point. So I'm going to use my putty knife, slide it down behind, and break these off. So now I'm going to put my handles on. This vanity came with the handles, so I didn't have to drill the holes. Came with the handles, and the holes were already drilled, so I didn't have to do anything. Just screw the handles on. Made it nice and easy. And there we go. Now there's little rubber bumpers. These go in the corners of the doors. That way when it slams, it doesn't make a loud noise. And I'll put those on the drawer up here as well. And then I'll add the handle to the drawer. Again, the holes were drilled. So all I have to do is screw my handle in, and then I can add the vanity top that's already assembled. Let me check it for fit here. Make sure everything is in good shape. Looks like it's going to go, and I have to caulk some areas over on the side there. So I'm going to take my top back off and silicone with some white kitchen and bath silicone around the perimeter of the vanity top, and I'll go a little bit up the wall here just in case any water happens to get behind my vanity top. Then I'll bring my vanity top back in and try to set it into place here. So I've got it set right on the silicone. There we go. Now I can hook up my cold supply line to the shutoff, and then I'll hook up the hot supply line to my shutoff, tighten them down. Once I get those tightened up, I can start working on my drain. I've got a extension piece here that I need to use because the drain's too low and it'll slide up and down. And you can see I haven't cut my pipe in the wall yet, and I have to cut it back. Now that I know how far to cut it, I'll put my cutter on here and cut a few inches off, and we'll see how it fits. I'll put my adapter back on, get my trap, and it's still a little bit long, so I'll take my adapter off and I'll cut the pipe down just a little bit more, and that should do it. I like to dry fit this in place, and that looks like that'll work. So I'll go ahead and take my trap adapter off and I'll glue it on to the wall pipe. Put a little glue on the pipe, and that's why I did not cut my pipe down or glue my trap adapter on previously, because I wasn't sure how long I'd need it to be. So I let that dry for a few, and then I can put my trap back together, hook it up to my extension pipe. I like to put everything together kind of loose at first, so that way it gives some adjustability. Once I get everything adjusted, I can go through and tighten each fitting, and I'll go through and make sure that they're all tight. And then I'm going to caulk around the wall to the vanity. I'm going to use a painter's caulk on this. The reason I'm using a painter's caulk versus a kitchen and bath, because this has a paintability factor to it. It's able to be painted. Anytime I caulk anything up against something that's going to be painted, I want it to be paintable. If I used a silicone here, you wouldn't be able to paint a nice straight line. So I use a painter's caulk, and I'll put a bead in there and kind of smooth it over and push it down with my finger all the way around. Get it nice and smooth, so when it dries, it's a nice looking finish. I'm going to take the aerator out of the faucet before I turn on the supply lines. And the reason I do that, there's a lot of calcium buildup in the lines, and you kind of jostle some of that loose, and then I'll turn the faucet on slowly because it's going to cough and spit and sputter. There's air in the lines from when I drained them out doing all the soldering. So I'll turn those on slow, and any debris that are in there, they'll come out and go down the drain, and then I can put my aerator back onto the faucet. It's always a good idea to do that. I've seen so many aerators get clogged before. And then I'll check my drain, make sure everything's sealed off and there are no leaks. And then I'll do one last test. I'll fill the sink all the way up and leave the water running, and then I'll let the water out and get a good rush of water and check and make sure the drain works with the most pressure it's ever going to see, hopefully, and everything looks good. So I'm going to move on to putting the door up into the bathroom. I'm just going to reinstall the same door, make sure the door is plumb, put my shims in, and then I'll use my nail gun, tack it into place a couple places, and then run around with more shims and nail it in the rest of the way. I'm going to reuse the case molding, so I'll line that right up here. And I need to put the top piece on so I know where my right leg's going to go. And I'll nail that into place. And it looks like I've got a few screws here that I'll have to patch on the top that are showing. Didn't get covered by the molding, so I'll have to come back and do those. I like to put some brad nails in the jamb of the door, going from the casing to the jamb, just to hold everything together. And then I'll also put one in the corner of the casing just to hold it together as well. And then all the way down both sides. And once I'm done, I'll take some painter's caulk and go around all the seams. And then I'll start to wipe it out with my finger. And what I do, once I get a little bit of caulking on my finger left over, I'll wipe it into the nail holes and kind of fill in the nail holes with the excess caulking. And get it nice and smooth with a damp towel once I'm done. Okay, let's go to the inside, and we'll put the casing on the inside the same way we did on the outside. Nail it into place. Put the top piece over. Gotta line it up with the right leg. There we go. Got that in place. Now I can nail the top piece in. And then I'll use my brad nailer again to put the casing to the door jamb. Just helps hold it together a little bit better. Use the bigger nails for the casing going to the frame, and then use the brad nails where the molding is smaller going to the jamb. And I'll run around, put some caulking in all the cracks that are showing, and work it in with my finger. And again, I'll fill in the nail holes with the excess and wipe it down with a damp cloth. Got a little nail hole here and here, and wipe that off. And looking pretty good, about ready for some trim paint on this door jamb. But first I'm going to go outside the bathroom and fill in those 3 little screw heads that we're showing. Just put a little bit of drywall spackle in there. Get it nice and smooth, and that should be ready. So at this time, my countertop end cap is dry, so I'm going to route down the end, and I've got a flush cut bit with a bearing on it. I've got it set to the thickness of my laminate sheet, and I'm just going to run it along the countertop. The bearing will sit on the countertop, and the router bit is going to route out the laminate sheet, so it'll be a pretty close to exact fit. And I'll run it all the way around my end cap here, all the way around the back and along the bottom, and it'll follow the contour of the countertop. And once I get done, I'll take a file just to knock the sharp edge off, and I want to file towards the countertop, not away from the end cap. If I file away from it, there's a chance I could pick the end cap off, and I don't want to do that. So I've got my countertop ready to go on. I'll put my counter back into place. It sits down into the floor just like that. And I've located my studs. I know there's one right here, so I'll go ahead and put a screw in here. And I also know there's a screw here because there's an outlet right above it. So I'll put a screw in here as well. Fill in this area with the shim, and then I can tighten the screw down and break the shim off. Next, I'm going to check the length of my screw and make sure it doesn't go through the countertop. Then I'll set the countertop in place and push it all the way back against the wall. And I take these drawers out so that I can get to the cleats on the corner of the cabinet, and that's what's going to hold the countertop in place. There's 4 cleats on the corner of the cabinet, and you want to hold the countertop down as you screw into the countertop, or you can have someone push down on it from the top. And I'll screw the back ones in. And one more screw over in this corner. And my countertop's on. I can go back out and run a bead of caulking along the backsplash. And again, I'm using a painter's caulk because at some point someone's going to want to paint the wall behind the cabinets. If I used a silicone, you wouldn't be able to paint it. So I'm using a painter's caulk, and I can just smooth that over with my finger. And there we go. So it's time to install the toe kick. And I've got it cut down to length. All I need to do is take my finish nailer and nail it into place. And there was also a piece of trim on the side here, and I'll put that back on just to cover up any of the grout line that might be showing. And that about wraps it up for half bath to full bath conversion, part 13. Check back for part 14. I'm How To Bob. As always, thanks for watching.